In the previous part of this lecture, we learned about what actually is a business process and why would we like to improve those business processes. And this led us to the field of business process management. Now, we will start off with quite a large picture, but it's actually similar to what we saw in the previous part. We still have an organization in the middle, we have inputs of the organization to the left and outputs to the right, and business processes exist as is. However, life is not as simple, because in practice, what you have to do when you have to consider when optimizing business processes or managing business processes, or even when you're setting those business processes up, is, for example, the environment that you are working in. Let's say the business environment. You are going to have to consider economical factors, regulatory factors, or cultural factors. Let's say, for example, that you have a business process that fulfills the needs of your customers perfectly, and you can do it in a very cost-efficient manner. However, if you're not abiding by the laws in your regulatory environment, then your company will be shut down, unfortunately. So this is something that you have to take into account when working with business processes and when trying to manage them and optimize them. Another part, of course, is competitors, because your competitors might, for example, offer the same services that you do, and they might be competing for the same customers. However, if they manage to offer the same service, let's say, for example, in a cheaper way, then your customers are going to move to your competitors, you will lose revenue, and ultimately your company might, again, have to be forced to shut down. Now, this is something that we obviously want to avoid. However, there is also a third factor in there. In organizations, you always have some kind of stakeholders, someone who is expecting steady profits from your organization. And this leads us to performance planning and performance management, where stakeholders might set up different targets that your company and as a result, the business processes that you have to meet. So this is kind of like the different parts of a larger environment that you have to take into account when working with business processes. And business process management is basically a discipline for doing just that, for improving performance in the general sense of the performance itself. But what does performance actually mean? So let's think about business process performance. If you had to choose between two services, you would typically choose the one that is the fastest, the cheapest, and also best. So you want your services to be faster, you want them to be cheaper, and better. Obviously, this is going to lead us to like the three dimensions of process performance, which are basically time, cost, and quality. Now, when you are optimizing your processes for one of those, then it's often the chance or often the case that you will have to make some concessions in some other areas. For example, if you want to drive the costs down, then this might very well mean that the quality is going to suffer a bit as well. Additionally, quality is especially interesting here, because quality can mean different things to different people, and there are different ways to approach quality. As an example, let's take a simple restaurant, where there is a simple process where a customer arrives, he is greeted and seated, he gets the menu and so forth, until the customer has had his meal and has paid for that meal. A very simple process, but it is sufficient for our purposes. So let's think about it for a moment. How would we actually improve that process? How would we make it better? And there are multiple ways of doing that. You could outsource some parts of work to your customers. You could, for example, standardize the menu by, let's say, reducing the items that you have on the menu and thus reducing possible food waste. Or you could maybe reorient yourself towards different foods that do not require cooking. You could automate parts of your work. You could invest and build. You could resequence some events. You could eliminate waiters. So there are a lot of things that you can do, and all of those, they are going to come at some cost. But they will also bring some benefits. And no matter which ones here you choose to do, which way you try to go with changing the way your business operates, each of those changes are going to, at the very least, result in changes of the underlying business processes as well, if not changing those processes directly. One example that you can see here is resequencing. This is a very nice example because in some cases people have figured out that even if you do exactly the same tasks that you have done before, if you just change the order of the tasks, then in some cases that may alone may be sufficient in order to improve the overall process, overall performance of your process. And in a few slides, we will see a very small example of that. But in summary, what is business process management? It is a body of principles, methods, and tools to analyze, design, execute, and monitor business processes with the aim of improving their performance. As we saw, improvement can mean multiple different changes. You can approach it differently, but ultimately that is our end goal, to make our business processes as effective as possible. And this is the field where, or this is the aspect, the part where business process management comes into play. It utilizes various techniques, various methods to improve your processes. And business process mining falls into the field of business process management. And this we will see in the next part of this lecture. However, before we go there, I want to give like an improvement example. So one way, without doing any, let's say, automated data analysis, without applying data algorithmics or anything like that, you can do process improvement manually. You could go to a company, interview people in that company, and figure out how they are doing their work. You can observe what they are doing, when, in what order, and so forth. For example, let's say that we went to a company, we interviewed people, and we found out that if the purchase order is confirmed, then an invoice is emitted and the goods are shipped. Now let's assume that we did a bit more digging. We looked at how the invoices look and what's the procedure of like the actual steps of shipping the goods. And let's say we figure out that actually there is no reason to do them in that sequence. So one simple improvement that we could make is we just set it up such that shipment of goods and emitting the invoice can be done in parallel. Now, doing it this way, through interviews and observations, of course, you can do quite a lot. But as the organization itself, as it becomes bigger and bigger, the less feasible it becomes to do those tasks manually. And this is one of the main motivations for why we need process mining. And in the next part of the lecture, I will give you some further motivational reasons.